Hello, dear students. I'm Dr. GovindSaraswat, Assistant Professor in English from Government College, Digana. Dear students, today we are going to discuss the difference between two verse forms, blank verse and free verse. But before we do that, first of all, we should know what do we mean by verse. We have a few definitions of verse which are relevant to literature. Originally, a verse is referred to a single line of a poem. It has also come to mean any grouping of lines in a poem, for example, a stanza or indeed an entire poem. So the general conception that we have about this word is that we use it for the whole poem, but originally it was used only for a single line of that poem. Then gradually people they attached it with the stanza pattern of the poems, but nowadays we, in a general way, use it for the whole poem. It is used to define the difference of poetry and prose. There is a difference between poetry and prose, and the rules of versification they create the necessary difference between poetry and prose. It contains an internal rhythmic pattern and more often than not rhyme also. So after this discussion over verse, let's move to its forms. First of all, we will talk about blank verse. So blank verse was first of all used by the Earl of Surrey, Henry Howard. He used it in his translations of the Aeneid. Blank verse consists of lines, unrhymed lines of iambic pentameter. So we can say that when a poet uses uh, a regular metrical pattern of iambic pentameter in his poetry, but he doesn't bother about the rhyme scheme. That is why we can say that blank verse is devoid of rhyme, but it has its rhythm. So whenever you find lines of iambic pentameter which are unrhymed, we can say that the poet has employed blank verse. It is a very flexible English verse form which can attain rhetorical grandeur while echoing the natural rhythms of speech. And because of its audible pattern and because it was free from the restrictions of rhyme scheme, it soon became the standard meter both for the dramatic and narrative and meditative poems. Much of the finest verse in English by Shakespeare, Milton, Wordsworth, Tennyson has been written in blank verse. For example, Milton has used blank verse in his epic poems, Wordsworth in his prelude, Tennyson has employed blank verse in Idylls of the King. We we can also cite the example of Robert Browning, who employed blank verse in his masterpiece Ring and the Book. Eliot's Wasteland is very famous, and it's an example. It is written in blank verse, and then the master Wallace Stevens he used it in for Sunday morning. So this is all about blank verse. Now let's move to free verse. It is a French. It's similar to French term verse libre. Free verse is a kind of poetry that doesn't conform to any regular meter. The length of its lines is irregular, as is its use of rhyme, if there is any. So free verse is free from all rules of versification. Blank verse follows some, but free verse is free from everything. So instead of a regular metrical pattern, free verse uses more flexible cadences of rhythmic groupings, sometimes supported by some devices of repetition like anaphora. Now, the most practiced verse form in English, it has its precedence in translations of the biblical psalms and in some poems of Black and Gothic, but established itself only in the late 19th and the early 20th centuries. So it has a beginning, but it became very popular in the late 19th and the early 20th century, and we can find its example in The Leaves of Grass, written by Walt Whitman. And then the French symbolist used this tool uh, later on by the poets of modernism. They employed free verse very freely in order to in order to pen down whatever comes into their mind, because it was an age where autotelic writing also came into existence, and the effect of surrealism can also be seen in their writing. And we can cite some examples like Eliot's Ash Wednesday is written in this verse form. Now let's talk about the difference between free and blank verse. Despite their similar names, free verse and blank verse poems are different. First of all, we can see that blank verse follows some rules of versification, whereas free verse is free from all rules of versification. Then the effect in blank verse can be generated by employing the natural rhythms of speech, and the effect in free verse lies in the use of rhythmic groupings and repetition of words and phrases, as I have suggested, like in the use of anaphora. And blank verse is devoid of only rhyme scheme, whereas free verse is devoid of all the set rules of versification. Then, uh, as the definition of blank verse is that blank verse is written in regular metrical pattern, i.e., that is iambic pentameter, whereas free verse doesn't follow any regular metrical pattern. Then we can also talk about the origin that blank verse poetry came of age in the 16th century, whereas free verse poetry has been popular from the 19th century onwards. So that is all about the difference between blank verse and free verse. I hope that it will be very useful for you, and thank you for listening me very carefully.